In 2002, a girl that likes writing Sailor Moon fanfiction sits down to tackle a somewhat bigger project. Satisfied with the first few chapters of her story, she posts them on fictionpress.com, where it soars to popularity, so much so that she eventually decides to take it down and publish it as a book. By that point, the book's title is Throne of Glass, and the author is Sarah Janet Maas. And everything changed when the Fire Nation attacked. I, like a lot of other people, was introduced to Sarah J. Maas not through A Throne of Glass, but through A Court of Thorns and Roses. And I, like a lot of other people, hated it. Didn't personally enjoy some core elements of the book. But I'm just a hater at heart, and I understand that a lot of people liked it, and they have every right to. I'm not here to shit on ACOTAR today. And besides, I liked Fourth Wing, which everybody seems to hate these days, so what do I know? But before we get into that, why do so many people dislike A Court of Thorns and Roses? And how is it so goddamn popular despite that? In 3 words: enemies to lovers. Now, what enemies to lovers means, you know what it means. It's pretty self-explanatory, and even if it weren't, BookTok and BookTube circle the concept like they're flies above a mauled deer carcass. Enemies to lovers means a certain kind of tension. Tension that often disguises its many pitfalls. In my opinion, there's 2 cardinal sins that an author can commit when writing enemies to lovers. The first is really exaggerating the enemy bit and then just making them kiss with zero resolution of any of their issues. Listen, Carden tried to fucking drown Jude, alright? Oh, he tried to drown her for heart reasons. Oh, that makes perfect sense. Except it doesn't. I may be rotten, but my virtue is that I'm not a killer. I wanted to frighten you, but I never wanted you dead. I never wanted anyone dead. Carden, babe. That's what we call a lie. Or just not understanding what makes an organism stop working. But I guess there's no need to address that ever again. Fourth Wing commits the second cardinal sin of enemies to lovers. Never having the enemies be enemies at all. Spoilers for Fourth Wing start here. If that doesn't bother you, I'm gonna assume you read Fourth Wing. But in case you didn't, it's about this physically frail young woman named her name is Violet. She goes to Dragon Rider School. And because she's the daughter of an important general who ended a big rebellion years ago, the son of the late rebel leader has it out for her. At least that's what we're told is happening constantly. If Jack wants to kill me, he needs to get in line. Besides, I have a feeling Xaden Rorson is going to beat him to it. Xaden watches me with a cold, calculating look that feels like he's plotting my death from where he stands as the wing leader for Fourth Wing. Anyone else feel like changing their mind? Xaden shouts, scanning the remaining rows of cadets with the same shrewd gaze of the navy blue dragon behind him. Xaden calls out, a cruel smile tilting his lips. Wow, guys, I'm starting to believe that he wants her dead. Except he clearly doesn't. We are never given a reason for why he would, even as Violet keeps harping on and on about how he definitely wants to kill her. Like, I understand that because of his backstory, there's like a theoretical motivation there. He had a family member killed and now he has the chance to take revenge. Certainly traumatic, not an uncommon motive in fantasy books. But not everyone who loses a family member decides to kill someone about it. For example, Violet Sorengale. She even brings this up after the parapet challenge. Her brother died in battle against Fen Rorson, who was Xaden's dad, and she never thinks about killing him in retaliation. Violet never feels or expresses like real aggression towards Xaden, but we're expected to assume that that's his default emotional reaction, even though there's hardly any evidence for this. Like, yeah, he says, why would I waste my time killing you when the parapet will do it for me? But that's in response to Violet asking him, are you going to kill me? And this just keeps happening throughout the book. He implies vague, violent intent in a very chill manner and then proceeds to never take any of the many chances he has to end Violet lawfully. Like, why? At the parapet, he could just push her into the canyon. If he'd wanted to do it discreetly, he could have used his shadows. Same with the gauntlet race. Forget defending her when she bends the rules for herself, which he also does. Trip the woman. Problem solved. Tell on her for poisoning her opponents, or just warn the next one. Snap her neck in the ring, which is a thing that's established to be legal and without consequences for you. Strangle her with shadows when there's no witnesses around after she stumbles upon your capital offense tutoring club. This bothers me. Violet sees him with the other marked ones, doing what we know is an illegal activity. Before she bonds Tarn, so no alternative reason to let her live at this point. The lives of every single marked child are dependent on her not spilling the beans about this. We later learn that if Xaden or any of his friends betray the kingdom, then collective punishment is likely to ensue. And now, a man who took personal responsibility for all of these young people, who was described as ruthless by his friends like 3 seconds ago, how might such a person deal with this situation? The answer is probably not. Banter sexily and walk away. But that's what he does. And even when he gets, like, verbally mean, I would argue that he's not any crueler than what we've come to expect from military leadership in this book. Violet's mother aside, even Dane snaps at people and makes references to people dying when he's in his squad leader mode. In my opinion, Xaden and Violet are really never enemies. Actually, they are immediate friends. The only reason they don't call it that is because Violet is continually suspicious of him in her internal monologue. He cares for you. That's already hard enough for him. I scoff. He cares about keeping me alive. There's a difference. He's the last person I should be craving, but lust and logic never seem to go hand in hand. My brow furrows as I study the stark lines of the rebellion relic that winds up his neck, marking him as a traitor's son, warning everyone that he's not to be trusted. Maybe he's telling me to keep quiet for his own gain, so he can use me later down the road. This is on page 236. Violet basically thinks that Xaden is dangerous and a threat to her for much longer than makes any sense, which opens up the possibility of a really unfortunate interpretation of her character when you take into consideration how she describes Xaden's skin tone repeatedly. Let's not think about that too hard. Fortunately, there's a much stronger explanation for why Violet is behaving like this. Why the tension of their relationship never eases even when it would make sense for it to. Rebecca Yarros is stuck in enemies to lovers hell. For you see, people who write enemies to lovers are mostly widely beloved by the book community, but there's the very real danger of taking things too far. Especially in the last couple of years, awareness of male violence in books has sharpened drastically. Having the tall, dark, and handsome book boyfriend that you wrote be labeled an abuser is something that's increasingly hard to come back from. And I don't want to complain about political correctness here. It's a good thing that not being a psychopath is becoming a baseline requirement for male love interests in fiction. But a lot of enemies to lovers books are not written to showcase a healthy, loving relationship between two people, but to be tantalizing and hot and full of tense, sexy tension. And books and people suffer whenever these things get mixed up. To get back to Akhtar for a moment here, an ugly blend of the problems that can arise from this are what killed Tamlin's character in the end. Because, yeah, he does kind of disregard Farah's boundaries, and technically he keeps her prisoner. But the reason why nobody who only reads the first book ever suspects that he's going to turn into a villain is because this is completely normal behavior for an enemies to lovers book. And I'm not saying that these behaviors are normal or okay in real life to any degree. But most people who read these sorts of books understand that they're not supposed to showcase real life. They're supposed to be spicy fantasy. Spicy fantasy is what this series is. Sarah J. Maas wrote A Court of Thorns and Roses intending for it to be hot. Intending for Tamlin to be hot. You cannot tell me otherwise. But the problems start when she suddenly decides to apply a totally different set of morals to the story. Morals that are rooted in real-life logic. Xaden and Violet are set up as the typical enemies to lovers couple. Unequal power dynamic. Physical fighting. Flirting and threats kind of blending together. Constant sizzling attraction. And that's fine. But because of how Rebecca Yarros wants the story to play out, there's now no reason for there to be tension, because Xaden doesn't do anything morally questionable ever. With Xaden, Yarros is trying to have her cake and eat it. She wants a sexy, dark, tense, mysterious love interest, but she also wants a healthy, acceptable, modern relationship for her protagonist. She wants a spicy fantasy plotline and real-world romance approval. So now we have Violet wandering around the world like, what? Xaden helped me? After helping me repeatedly? After training me physically and mentally? After custom making stuff for me twice? What? But he's the last person who could ever care for me. It's like every character in the book and the reader are collectively pretending that there's any reason not to like Xaden at this point. Oh, he's kind of rude. Off with his head, I guess. This isn't enemies to lovers. It's acquaintances to immediate assigned soulmates to lovers. Enemies to lovers is a popular trope, but it's also harder to get right than people like to pretend. When you have two enemies, you also need corresponding different worldviews, or at least opinions. And if you don't want one of them to be absolutely evil, then you're going to have to apply some complexity to this. But even so, it's not bad to have a character who has a very negative trait or set of traits, and who is, over the course of their romance with their partner, transformed into somebody truly compatible and likable. In my opinion, Yaros's refusal to take any risks with Xaden, to jeopardize his likability in the tiniest of ways, smothers any hint of tension that he might otherwise bring to the table. And the fact that the rest of Fourth Wing is such a fun goddamn read is a true credit to Rebecca Yarros as a writer. Good world building, some recognizable structure of the military that we're given insight into, and side characters that don't just exist around and for Xaden and Violet elevate the story of Fourth Wing above spicy fantasy. Violet has obvious plot armor, but she's not a complete Mary Sue either. Throughout the book, you really feel like you're advancing with her. The action scenes are well structured and engaging, and they never feel drawn out. I like that sexuality is fluid and relaxed and positive in this book. I feel like the publishing industry is finally taking a step away from the blushing virgin YA heroine. I was really positively surprised when Violet started flirting with Dane. In the books that I grew up with, overt female interest was not something that a character you were supposed to root for or identify with would do. And even though it all gets a little weird with Xaden, I think that as a whole, it was handled pretty well. Sin City was amazing. Is Fourth Wing the best fantasy book ever written? No. Does it deserve the hype that it broke the doors down with? Probably not. But does it deserve all of the hate it gets just for being popular? Absolutely not. A lot of the criticism that I've seen of Fourth Wing is just a symptom of this is not for me, which makes sense because Fourth Wing was so big that it fell into the laps of a lot of people who couldn't be further from its target audience. But if you're willing to get over that, and if you're able to just take Rebecca Yaros's word for it that Xaden is a dangerous emo, I swear, you'll have a really good time with Fourth Wing. And I, for one, am curious where the final plot twist leads us in the next book.